So good afternoon. Welcome to InnoFest and our little panel on A Better You Through Medtech. My name is Rob Hodges. I'm the Senior Director of Medtech for SGInnovate, and I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our panelists. First, we have Nilesh Shah, who is the General Manager of Clinical Care Solutions for ASEAN, South Asia, and Africa for GE Healthcare. He has over 20 years of experience in healthcare and is currently the General Manager of Clinical Care Solutions at GE Healthcare based in Singapore. He's responsible for Africa, ASEAN, and South Asia, which includes over 5 billion people with little or no access to healthcare. He champions better access and quality to underserved populations in these markets through holistic solutions that includes not only disruptive, low-cost technologies, but also education and training to drive sustainable improvement to healthcare standards in these markets. Welcome, Nilesh.
Thank you.
Next, we have Joanne Niall, Senior Consultant at the National Cancer Center in Singapore. Joanne's the Senior Consultant in the Division of Medical Oncology at the National Cancer Center in Singapore, where she currently heads the Cancer Genetics Service with an academic interest in hereditary cancer syndromes and translational clinical cancer genetics. Next, we have Enno Nehrbass, Head of Strategy and Digital Health Services, Asia Pacific, from Siemens Healthineers. Enno has more than 10 years of top management consulting experience with special focus on digital transformations working in Asia, especially China and ASEAN. He has an interest in cloud-based digital ecosystems and artificial intelligence in healthcare. Finally, we have Jeevesh Kapur, co-founder and chief medical officer at Medo.ai. Jeevesh is a senior radiologist at a leading hospital here in Singapore and has overseen ultrasound for the last 8 years. He's a pediatric radiologist by training, and he's involved in education and training for the ASEAN region. So before we start off with questions, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to spend a few minutes telling a short story about an experience or aspect where they've been personally involved in advanced med tech, making a significant difference in people's lives. So Nilesh, I'll start off with you.
Will do. Thanks, Rob. So the innovation that comes to my mind is something that's very simple yet effective. It's called a incubator. So for those of you, either yourself or somebody in your loved ones had a baby that was prematurely born. The normal gestation is 38 weeks. And if the baby is born before that, it needs to be put into an incubator, which simulates the environment of the mother's womb. It is temperature controlled, oxygen level, soundproof, and the right humidity. Right? So it's a very simple innovation, yet powerful in saving baby's life. And now we can save babies that are prematurely born up to maybe 28 weeks. And the story that comes to my mind is I do travel across Africa, ASEAN, and India. And about 2 months ago, I went to India in the state of Gujarat, where I was meeting with a guy named Dr. Mehta, who is a neonatal ICU specialist. He has about 35 of these incubators in his private clinic. And first of all, we were supposed to meet with him at 9 o'clock. And he kept on changing his time. We didn't meet him until 6 p.m. And I'm thinking, you know, what an arrogant guy, right? I mean, we have an appointment. I've come all the way from Singapore to meet him. Yet he keeps on changing his time. And eventually we meet him late in the evening. Well, when we sit down and I ask him, what do you actually do? What's your protocol? The reason he cannot give his time is because his protocol is that if there is a premature baby to be born, he wants to be on site because his protocol is that he wants to be there when the baby is being delivered. Because there is a specific process that he thinks can help the survival rate for the baby. And that's why he's always on the call. So that kind of, first of all, put things in perspective that this guy is concerned about when these deliveries happen, and he goes to on site, takes the baby, puts it in his own mobile incubator, brings back to his center, and then takes care of it. The interesting point is he asked me, Nilesh, what do people like you worry about? What does stress you out? And I said, well, Doc, it's about numbers, it's about growth, it's about our our management, all that. And then I said, but Dr. Mehta, what stresses you out? And he paused for about 10, 15 seconds, and then he said, I have a case right now. It's a twin, prematurely born. The good thing is that the baby survived and were able to be delivered effectively. But the kidneys have failed. He thinks the maximum chance that the kids can survive is 6 years, maximum. Most likely, the kids will probably don't make it past 2 or 3 years. The parents are very poor. They came from 3 hours away from the city. For the rest of the baby's life, they're going to have to come for dialysis to the city every often. They don't have the money. They don't have the resources. The doc said that I'm trying to convince the parents to say, let it go. He said he got a professional counselor, showed them all the data, and the parents still said, no, we want to keep the child. And he said, Nilesh, that's what stresses me out, because for me, I know what life these parents and the kids will go through for the next 3 years. Thanks to the incubator, I'm able to save them. But what's going to happen for the next 3 years? The reason I tell this story, Rob, is that technology will always outpace and will be saving more and more lives. But I think it's a responsibility for the technologist, for the clinician, for the society, to look at what's the other aspects besides technology? What's the moral dilemma? At what cost are we going to save lives? And can we improve the quality of life that these patients will have going forward? And then, so that kind of, it's about innovation, but it goes beyond that, which people like yourself, myself, and the clinicians need to work together to say there is a holistic solution that we need to provide, not just work on the biggest and the baddest technology going forward.
Thanks, Nilesh. I think that frames things quite nicely. Joanne?
Okay, so my story actually starts with finishing medical oncology training. So I trained first in medical oncology. That means I'm a chemo doctor. I see patients with either early or late stage cancers, and we decide treatment for patients. I got very quickly dissatisfied with that mode of treating patients. This was back in about 2006, 2007. And because it didn't really give me an opportunity to try and prevent or detect cancers a lot earlier. And it didn't really give me an opportunity to understand why patients were getting cancers. So I went for another fellowship in genomics. So right now, my practice is very much about using genomics to help identify various risk groups of patients, whether someone's at higher risk of developing certain types of disorders, and then how do we therefore implement early detection and early surveillance. I think I just came back from a conference 2 weeks ago. The adage of that conference is patients don't want more treatment. They want better treatment. They don't want more screening. They want better screening. So I think the whole, how I've used MedTech is very much in terms of genomics. How do we pick the right drugs, the right screening programs for specific patients? And I think one of the reasons why I'm here is that I'm a big advocate for the fact that MedTech needs to engage. As Nilesh mentioned, it's a multidisciplinary process to try and get a technology into practice, and that I do feel, having a medical oncology background, industries like pharma engage us a lot earlier to try and bring things into the clinic, whereas for MedTech, somehow I'm finding that the engagement comes more as an afterthought. So I'm here to try and encourage, I guess, MedTech companies and all to come and engage us more, and so that we can actually sort of try and do real-world data, so that's helpful for you, and it's going to be helpful for us as well as clinicians. So that's my story.
Joanne. We'll come back to some of that,
sure,
by the way. Enno.
Well, Rob, I think first off, because you were asking about a story that is touching people's lives and is making an impact on people's life. Actually, I think in MedTech and in healthcare overall, we are incredibly privileged that the technology that we provide actually is touching people's life. To give you a little bit of a flavor, and I did some analysis prior to the panel, for the technologies that Siemens Healthineers is providing, we have about 200,000 patients that we are touching, treating, or diagnosing with our equipment every hour. Every hour, 200,000 patients. And I think that's a true privilege. Now, on a story and on a project that I have been recently involved in, and this is about rural India, or second, third tier cities in India. These cities in India are actually, there is a shortage of qualified personnel, qualified techs, qualified radiographers, for example. And I think that's a situation as well that we see in some of the ASEAN countries as well. What we've been working with these customers and these clinics in India is to provide them with technology that would allow them to remotely connect to remote sites to run high-end imaging equipment also in second-tier cities, third-tier cities. So they wouldn't need a tech on site or a radiographer on site, but they can steer it from a central place, and actually allows to bring higher technology also to places where it usually wouldn't reach the people. And that's truly something where I could see it's also making a true difference and a true change to people's life every day.
Thank you, Enno. Jeevesh?
Great to hear your story, Enno. So basically, my story starts where Enno ends. So a bit of a background. So I'm a pediatric radiologist, and I actually travel extensively in the region to third world countries to teach and give a workshop. So maybe about 6-7 years ago, I was in Cambodia for a short workshop. I was working in a small pediatric hospital there. And the story which touches me is that there was a small kid who was flown in, or sort of driven into the hospital from about 500 kilometers in the center of the country. So the kid had some abdominal pain once it started. So obviously there was no imaging, or there was no diagnosis, or there was no pediatrician over there. So they brought the kid all the way to this hospital that I was working in. And this was a small basic hospital. And by the time the kid came to us, unfortunately, the kid didn't make it. So they've traveled for 6 hours on a bus, reached the hospital. At the hospital gate, we couldn't save the kid. And I felt so terrible that, all it needed was a simple ultrasound, a simple diagnosis to actually see what the problem was. The kid had some pneumothorax, and all it needed was some small tube you put into a baby, and he could have lived. So that sort of made us think about where we stand. And I'm a radiologist, and so a couple of researchers and us got together, and we thought, look, there are two-thirds of the world population does not have access to basic imaging, which is like a major problem. Of course, this may not be a problem in a first world country, but countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, India, and Philippines and some peripheral areas, there's not even a basic imaging guy sitting over there for a simple diagnosis. So we thought, okay, it's about time that you should decentralize and democratize this imaging. So we started with a collaborative process where we thought, okay, fine, we'll work with ultrasound, because ultrasound is a very portable, safe technology. You can literally put it in your pocket, take it anywhere you want. And maybe instead of bringing patients to the hospital or patients to radiologists, we bring the radiologists and the imaging to the patients so that they don't have to travel so long. So we started the startup, which sort of basically works with ultrasound. So what we create is a AI software which empowers these ultrasound machines. So of course, getting a machine is very easy. You can just buy and market, and the problem lies with interpretation. Problem lies with how to do a scan. So we are working on a software which sort of democratizes that. So you don't have to train for 15 years like me. All you need to do is do a quick sweep, and our AI technology, so our software actually gives you the access and gives you the diagnosis. So we started with working with kids because that's very close to our heart. But that's how our story started. So now obviously we just started, and we're looking to expand to the rest of the world, where it's needed the most.
Thank you, Jeevesh. In fact, I think all of this kind of frames things in a way where a better you through medtech means different things to different people in different places. So starting off with the first question, this is for you, Nilesh. So the needs for healthcare in your focus regions are quite different from those of other places, for example, the US. So tell us some of the cool things that GE Healthcare is doing in medtech in those regions.
Sure. So, first of all, I feel tremendously fortunate to be able to see how things are happening in Africa, in ASEAN, and in India. And having lived in the US before, yes, the challenges are different, the solutions are different. Let me give you one example. I'm not sure if you've heard about a CT scanner, a CAT scan, right? So in India and Africa, there are these refurbishers that buy 15, 20-year-old machine that are scrapped from the US on eBay. They buy those machines, they open them up, repaint, rewire, and I've been to one of those refurbishers, and they sell them for $75,000 as an entry-level CT, which for a new setup, it is economical because they can still charge the same to the patient. So the patient payment doesn't change, but why spend $200,000 or $300,000 for a machine when you can get the same sort of machine at $75K? Now that machine is 20 years old or 15 years old, has a lot of radiation, more than what you normally need, doesn't have a good picture. So as GE, we thought, what happens if we give them a brand new machine at $125,000 that still does all these things and better, but the price point is enough for them to justify the return. And we gave the challenge to our engineering, who at first said it's not possible. Given the mechanics of the device, it's not possible. This is our team in India and China. Eventually they did. They came up with a new design, which now is applied in our most premium machine. So here's typically our mindset is to take the most premium machine, strip it down of all the features, bring it down to a price point, and then sell it in India and Africa. In this case, GE Healthcare took a different approach, gave a new challenge and a funding to the teams in China and India and said, drive something different so that our cost is below a certain level so that we can still make money, but give it at a good price point. And by the way, so this machine, we have sold 1,000 of those. Our initial plan was about 300. And it provides an upgrade path. So if a customer over the 10-year time frame needs to change and go to a higher slice, we have a software design in there that allows them to upgrade. So this is one cool thing which started off in the emerging market and now was then applied to our super premium machine that is being sold in US and Europe. So that's something that is cool about. The other part I would say is it's not just about the technology. Because what we find in our region is that if you don't educate, to Joanne's point, one example is we had a baby warmer that is used for, again, premature babies to keep warm. We donated some equipment in Myanmar, and when we visited after 3 months, Rob, we asked where are the baby warmers, and they said, well, they're there at the corner. We are using them to warm towels. So this is where we as a company failed, that we gave them the equipment, but didn't educate the clinicians, the nurses, on saying what it needs and what it takes and how it's being used to better take care of the baby. So that's kind of the challenges. It's not just the product and mindset. It's about the solutions, the education, the overarching workflow, working with the clinicians. That's what kind of makes it fun and cool of my job, and I think what GE Healthcare does in this region.
Fantastic, Nilesh. Actually, we'll come back to some of those points a little later. But Joanne, although you're a genomics expert in oncology, the discussions that we've had in the past are more about optimization of workflows and making better use of data real time in a hospital setting to improve patient outcomes and reduce costs. So what's your vision of how to make that happen?
So I think globally, both in the States, in Singapore, as well as in the region, there's a lot of attention being placed now on, the payers. The payers are paying a lot of attention, whether it's, government or insurance or whoever the payer might be. There's a lot of attention as to what's the value of that technology and how is that helping? How is it meeting a gap? How is it improving quality? How is it improving outcomes relative to the cost? So this is something that unfortunately, as an industry, we can't get away from. If you want your medtech to be used, it needs to demonstrate these few features. And this is one area where there really isn't enough kind of crosstalk between clinicians and industry to try and plot through and chart, how do we measure these things? So how do we make it easier for policy people to therefore adopt this technology? I think we always hear the complaints about, the medtech groups would say, oh, regulations, really hard on us. Regulation would say, oh, but the clinicians are the ones that want this. So I think there needs to be a lot more thinking into how we do this together. So that's one. I'll give you an example. I didn't get to tell my story earlier, but I'll give you an example. I'm invited quite often now to the region to sort of, genetics is very sexy, right? So I won't say the countries, but I've invited to regions in the countries within the region where they say, help us do what you're doing now in the National Cancer Center in Singapore. How are we going to implement genomics in the clinics? One of the challenges, though, that it's very sexy, is actually very easy to implement genetics into clinics. But the problem is, to Nilesh's point, what's the whole workflow? How is it actually going to improve outcomes? One of the ways we use genetics is if somebody's found at high risk of colorectal cancer, the patients need to have more frequent colonoscopies. Yes. But if no one's addressing, after we've identified people at high risk, who's going to receive the colonoscopy? Are there enough endoscopists around to actually do that? Are there enough sort of downstream things? That's never going to prove valuable to whoever's paying for that to be implemented. So this is a danger when with adopting technology without looking at the whole process and how you actually bring outcome. The same thing goes for BRCA1, BRCA2 testing with breast cancer. In Singapore, we're lucky because screening is available widely and therefore it's implemented easily. But for certain countries where there isn't enough mammogram suites even to have that, why would you want to do genetics in that setting when you can't actually implement the downstream? So that's one frustration I have, is that we're not looking at the whole chain and the whole health. Because the goal here is really to improve health outcomes. It's not just sell technology, really. Yeah, or at least from my perspective. Yeah.
No, in fact, it's an interesting contrast in that, on one hand, you would say a better you through medtech is value-based healthcare. Mm-hmm. On another hand, it's access,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Which is the limitation. So, Enno, investments in digital health are increasing at a dramatic pace. You're involved in digital health. Can you share with us what Siemens Healthineers is doing in digital health in Asia Pacific and how that's the same or different from the implementation in say, the US?
Sure, yeah. Sure, happy to share, Rob. We are investing on a global level around €1 billion or so annually into R&D overall, and a good portion of this is actually going into digital topics by now. If you look at image analysis, for example, or connectivity solutions and so on, a lot of the things that medtech companies are doing, and I think probably you would agree, a lot of these things are fairly digital nowadays. So I'd say the hot topics that we are working on these days are around connectivity and workflows in a hospital. They are around making use of big data, and they are around, and you see this as well in the other panel discussions and speeches that you have here, around artificial intelligence. I think that's certainly also a hot topic to focus on. And to give you one flavor of what we're working on when it comes to artificial intelligence, is basically about making the work of a doctor, and specifically making the work of a radiologist, higher in quality and more efficient. And what we feel is specifically interesting is a topic of incidental findings, for example. So you might be doing a scan, and the radiologist might be looking at a certain part of your body, might be looking at your heart, for example, but at the same time there might be a background scan done where the AI helps you to identify and follow up on certain other things that you might be having as a problem you're not aware of. The doctor is not looking for it, but still the computer can help you to follow up on these. I think that's an interesting topic to look at in future. And if you're asking what's different in Asia from other places, I mean, the challenges are truly completely different. If you look at the US with probably a $10,000 plus per person per year spent on healthcare, it's really about using what we call population health management to bring down costs. And this is probably an issue that you would also see in places like Australia or places like Singapore. While when you're looking at Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, and so on, it's truly about improving access to care. But I think also in improving access to care, topics that are technology-driven can truly help a lot. As an example, something like telemedicine or the areas that you are working on, where you improve access and you improve quality by using, for example, a smartphone that many people have nowadays to give access for people to a doctor.
Awesome to hear that.
Interesting. And, you know, when I talk to people about digital health, I hear a lot of times, yeah, but the barriers to entry are lower compared to traditional devices, but the time to market can be faster. And really what you're doing is you're not selling a device and you're not selling a software, you're selling a service, right? So ultimately, that is the barrier to entry for others. Jeevesh, the next question's for you. So a major trend in medtech is decentralization and democratization, to take medtech to the patient rather than the patient to medtech.
Yeah.
So share with us what Medo is doing in this area, and how did you come up with the idea?
So very similar to the thoughts by Enno. So obviously, the problem is out there where there's not enough access to imaging. There's not enough access to basic patient management. And so what we decided and we thought about was to how to get this access to the patient itself. I mean, it's so difficult to get every single person to the hospital. And if you look at the hospitals now, there's the lack of manpower, there's not enough money to go around. And of course, we want the patient to feel empowered as well, as they should be able to decide, or they should be able to say, oh, I don't want to go home, or I don't want to go to the hospital, I want my treatment over here. So we feel that, of course, any patient management starts with the diagnosis, and imaging has a very central role in that diagnosis. But if you look at the world around, and especially Southeast Asia, stats say that there's only 0 to 1 radiologist per 100,000 patients in some areas. So obviously you can't have that kind of radiologists and that kind of clinicians who are trained and fly them all over the place. So what we thought was we bring the technology to them, and this is where we feel the AI-based and AI-empowered technology would actually make a difference. So how our vision is that, of course, using our software and using our AI, every single clinician, and not necessarily a radiologist, every single clinician would be able to carry a small ultrasound probe in his pocket and would be able to diagnose a problem on the spot at that time at the point of care. He doesn't have to travel, he doesn't have to move the patient, or doesn't have to wait for a diagnosis. So we envision maybe, of course, in 10 years down the line, every single household or every small clinic or every single home may have a small ultrasound device in their house, like they have a BP monitor or they have a glucose monitor. So you don't require a sort of AI based on that. But imagine every person actually carrying a small device in his pocket and diagnosing himself or diagnosing a problem and triaging himself and say, oh, do I need to go to the hospital or not? So envision that. So we want to give that power. We want to bring that expertise to the patient at that point. And this is where our vision lies.
That's a great story. And actually, I have a question I would like to ask, but it's more of a selfish question. So I'm going to skip and make sure that we leave some time for questions from the audience. So I'd like to ask a few general questions for everybody on the panel. So first, at SGInnovate, we invest in and support Singapore's deep tech startups, and medtech being an important part of that. We also believe in building from Singapore for the world. So I would like each one of your opinion what areas or technologies do you think Singapore can make the biggest impact globally, or at least on a regional scale? And I'll start off with you.
That's a great question, Rob. I feel Singapore is a perfect hub where you have a government that is friendly to supporting the startups, like you mentioned. There is enough know-how. There are clinicians, like Joanne mentioned, that are willing to test it. So first of all, I feel it's the right fertile ground for innovation that could be used elsewhere. I'll give you one example where we have tried to work, and we have worked with a startup here in Singapore, which was around ECG. So ECG is something that is very nominally done. The machines are cheap enough. It's not very difficult to do an ECG. But where we lack is the manpower, the skilled labor to be able to read those ECG reports. And we worked with a startup called Tricog that is now providing a service whereby anyone in the remote countries in ASEAN can run the ECG. It sends the scan over to this central hub. And within, I would say, 5 minutes is the turnaround time. You get a report back on your iPhone on whether it's a normal or it needs the next level of intervention. So it's, again, a small innovation, something that started off in Singapore that could be applied to ASEAN. And there is no reason why it could be applied even to countries like in Africa, whereby they can get the benefits of the best clinician and knowledge here in Singapore at a fraction of a cost and still serve the population that they have in Africa and India.
Okay, Joanne?
So I think the biggest asset is infrastructure, obviously, as well as the overall relatively high tech literacy between the various stakeholders and the public and patients. Overall, if you compare Singapore to other countries in the region, in general, people are comfortable with technology, they're comfortable with their smartphones, they're comfortable with being part of it. But I think one of the things that doesn't happen quite enough is the engagement of actually public as well and how they can play a part. There are a lot of examples of citizen science where actually apps and everything else is being made available such that everyone can take part in the development of medtech. One of the areas which I am kind of excited about, or rather would wish more people in Singapore would work on, is data security. I think that's one area where I think Singapore is well placed. We have, all these initiatives about smart nation. It's a big problem overall across any country and any industry, and including healthcare. So that's an area that we need better solutions for, and that's something that maybe folks here might want to focus on.
Okay, Enno?
I mean, first off, I would fully agree with the previous panelists that Singapore is a great place and a great nurturing ground for high-tech innovation. I think we got everything that we need here with regards to an advanced healthcare system, highly qualified people, a government that is willing to co-invest, for example. I think a lot of topics that are needed for this. I believe especially in the topic of digital health, there is a lot to gain because in the end, it does not need much more than a bunch of smart people who is working on the right topics to get something done that you can also easily export to Asia and the world. So I think that's certainly a topic that's interesting to focus on and that we also focus on here in Singapore.
Jeevesh?
I agree with the panelists about strategic location for Singapore first. And we always feel that I think Singapore is a gateway to Asia. The infrastructure is there, the government funding is there, the support system is there. And it's quite easy to actually do your trials and validation and whatever you create a product, and it's well reputed in the region. So whatever product or whatever results that come out of Singapore actually are very well received in the rest of the space. However, we feel that there is and I would like to point what Joanne just said about data. I think that's something that probably requires some sort of change in mindset. So yes, we agree that the data is important and we need to sort of have a lot of protection around it. But unfortunately, the mindset and the system in Singapore is not as conducive to startups like us, where data is everything. So for us, in fact, and I'm sure a lot of other small startups will feel the same way, access to this data is a limitation. And that's one of the reasons why we actually had to get our data from Canada, not really in Singapore. So all our trials and all our validations are actually done because it's cheaper, it's easier access, and it's much more straightforward. I'm not saying you should open up data, but I think a lot more work needs to be done to sort of change that mindset which comes in Singapore.
I think we could have a whole panel discussion on that topic alone. One more question and then we'll get to the audience. In just a few sentences, what's the one technology or aspect of medtech that excites you the most for the future? Nilesh?
I would say for me it is 3D printing and additives. It's amazing what you see, what we can do cheaper, lighter weight, faster right now with 3D printing. And as that develops over the next 10 years, is it going to help us print kidneys for transplant? Is it going to help us print some portion of lung transplant, liver transplant? Seems unreal right now, but 5 years ago, 3D printing was not in that scope. So I think if that, as it develops, I would say for the next 10 to 20 years, that probably might be the next greatest innovation that I can think of in medtech.
Thanks, Nilesh. Joanne?
There are many things I could cite, but I guess sticking to genetics, probably gene editing for me has been a tremendous research tool to allow us to understand how various mutations are actually causing disease and all of that. And now it's being used in the clinic for therapeutics, both in the somatic cancer setting as well as being trialed in the germline. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to start to see gene editing being a big part of it. There's a lot of conversations that needs to still be had as to how we implement that in the clinic, but I'm excited about where that goes.
Thank you, Joanne. Enno?
I think big data analytics, breaking down the data silos that we have in the healthcare system and using that to analyze, also with the help of AI, I think we will see tremendous opportunity coming out of this.
Yeah, obviously we are AI, so I would think that even though AI is said to be a cliche most of the times now, but I think going forward, machine learning and deep learning would actually make a lot of changes and technically revolutionize the way the medicine is going forward. We need to probably open our eyes to it, be more acceptable to the fact that, yes, there is a technology out there which may not replace us, but actually would support us. I think that sort of mindset would bring a revolutionary change in the area of medicine. Sure.
Well said. Okay, to some questions. And the first one, I'm not sure who wants to take that one. What are the lessons for startups, incumbents, and investors from the fall of Theranos?
I won't really take that, but I would say that this is an example of where it would be really important to partner with the clinicians and to use real-world data to sort of support the development, I think. I think a lot of medtech think that they only can approach the clinicians when they have the final product in place. That's not how pharma works, right? I mean, so I think even in the development phase, there is, I think, in this industry, a need to think about how you engage clinicians to co-develop some of these things with real-world data. I think that might help avoid, not specifically that situation, but situations such as that. And that's something I would encourage.
Yeah. I would say from my perspective, for startups, if you're working on an existing device or procedure that your innovation is going to make it cheaper, faster, and a better quality outcome, to me that's a much better route than to think of a total disruption. If you think that you can disrupt healthcare overnight, I'm sorry to say you're mistaken, because that will take a long, long time. So focus on something that there's a problem, my solution will make it cheaper for you, with better quality outcome, and a faster, then you got a slam dunk. So that's, I would say, is one lesson learned from us for startups.
I couldn't agree more. We talk to so many startups that spend very little time on the need, but love to talk about the technology to the end of the earth. Yeah. And if the need isn't clear and the opportunity is not big enough, it doesn't matter what the technology is.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, next question. I think this is going to have to be the last one. Health tech, med tech, biotech. Are we talking about the same thing? And why do investors take so long to warm up to new med tech startups? So who wants to answer the first part of that question?
Maybe I'll go. So, because I can tell my experience. Yeah, I think it's a very gray area about how do you differentiate health tech from med tech from biotech. Of course, I think medical field is so huge that every aspect, so you talk about biotechnology, you talk about medical innovation, it sort of encompasses everything. The problem that startups face first, of course, is to find a niche area. I mean, there's big companies, big corporates, and two of them are sitting next to me right now. They actually have a lot more resources. They have a lot more manpower. And they have they can hire the best brains out there to sort of outsmart or outpace us small startups. But having said that, I think it's very important to find that small niches which sort of solve a problem, which they go down to the roots and see what exactly is happening to the patients, what exactly is there. So it doesn't have to be everything. It doesn't have to be like a major thing. But if you find one niche area, I think you can certainly entice investors, you can entice a lot more innovation, you can ask people to come and join and collaborate. Because there are a lot of people out there who require so much. Again, all these big corporates can't solve everything. So first important is, of course, go in the market, but find a niche for yourself first.
So maybe just a quick comment before we close on the last part of that question. What I can say is that there's a lot of funding available in the early stages, in the research stage, mainly in the form of grants. There's funding available in the later stages from institutional money for scaling up and growth. In the middle is what we call the valley of death, because this is where the risk is still quite high. In medtech, you still need to go from a prototype to a real product, clinical validation, regulatory approvals. And so this is something where actually SGInnovate is taking a very active role to get involved in what we call venture building in order to help bridge part of that gap and then bring investors in with us to bridge the rest of that gap to get to the market. Yep. And this is something that is, I would say, very critical considering how much money has been put into R&D and how little things are coming out on the other side. So this is something we definitely need to do a better job at.